Hello, guys. This is Mr. Cole. Continuing on about fiscal policy. Again, fiscal policy, how the government uses its taxes and its spending to try to manage the economy. Yesterday, we learned about demand side economics, Keynesian economics, in which the idea is when the economy is in recession, when there's low GDP growth, we want to try and shift demand and grow demand. So you're going to cut taxes and you're going to increase government spending, and that in turn will drive the GDP up. Now, that was the general premise, and I have it drawn out here. This was the general rule of thumb for how to manage the economy for a good 40, 50 years after the Great Depression, right? The New Deal was such a success, and especially the way the government managed the economy during World War II. It showed that, government putting in a ton of money into people's hands through jobs and things like that is going to grow the GDP. Okay. Now, there's one thing to keep in mind here about Keynesian economics. As you shift the demand curve, okay, yes, your GDP goes up, but notice what else goes up. Your prices, your inflation goes up. Now, usually that's not a big problem, okay, because most times during a recession, as the economy is not doing well, as people quit buying stuff, places have to make their prices cheaper to get people to buy them. And generally speaking, the two go together. In fact, here I have a little chart. I hope you guys can still see this when I go full screen. So here's a general chart. So I picked 1993 till today. Okay. So if you look at the red line is the unemployment rate, the blue line is inflation. You can see that generally speaking, as unemployment goes down, a lot of times inflation goes up. Okay, that's because more people have jobs. Because more people have jobs, they buy more things. When they buy more things, prices go up. And you can see during times where unemployment rises, you can see inflation usually goes down, especially during 2008. Look here, look how high the unemployment rate went up, and in turn, what happened to inflation. Then you can see again, as unemployment went down, inflation went up. Usually those two are opposites of each other. Okay, when unemployment goes up, inflation goes down. When unemployment goes down, inflation goes up. That's the general rule, okay? And Keynesian economics works great in this situation, right? Like here in 2008, okay? We had deflation in 2008, meaning when we go and we raise the demand with stimulus checks, with job programs, things like that, and when you see inflation go up, well, who cares? 1 to 3% inflation is fine, not a big deal, okay? Well, the problem comes in the 1970s because an economic phenomenon that actually many economists thought was not even possible happens. And that is what we call stagflation. Okay, look here in 1974. In 1974, you saw unemployment go up, but inflation also go up with it. Okay, you also see it again in the early 1980s, right? Unemployment goes up, and inflation goes up with it. And this inflation is incredibly high, over 10% inflation, right? We usually 3% is high, right? So 10% is outrageous in such a short amount of time. This is what we called stagflation. It's a stagnant economy, an economy with a very high unemployment rate whose economy is not doing well, mixed with a raise in prices. This is bad news for an economy, okay? Because you have two bad things happening at the same time, right? Now, what drove it was an oil crisis. Basically, many of the Middle Eastern oil-producing countries, in protest of the United States' support of Israel during one of the wars that they were fighting in, decided to embargo the oil in the United States. They stopped selling us oil. So America's oil supply got a lot shorter. And as you know, everything uses oil, right? And so you were limited on how much oil you could buy. I mean, we're talking people lining up down the block to buy oil. And every single product has to be transported using oil. So all prices went up very, very fast. Okay. Now, the Federal Reserve Chair at the time, President at the time, decided, to handle this using basic Keynesian economics. Here's the problem. They have to get the economy going again, get GDP going up, and get prices to go down. So they don't know what to do. At first they try, okay, let's try and get the economy going. Well, when they try to get the economy going by shifting demand to the right, the inflation skyrocketed. Okay, so then they decide, okay, we have to get rid of inflation. So the Federal Reserve Chair at the time actually made the very painful decision to actually force the economy into recession. They raised taxes. They followed the Keynesian playbook. They raised taxes. They cut government programs. That caused inflation to go down some, okay? But now you have a falling GDP. People are losing their jobs. There's unemployment, right? So they're stuck, right? I mean, literally, for about 6-7 years, Federal Reserve and the government and the Congress are trying to figure out this really bad economy in the 70s. They don't know what to do. It is not until a new branch of economics comes around called supply-side economics that you start to see an actual solution to this. Okay, in supply-side fiscal policy, the idea is to try to grow the economy, not by helping individual consumers, but by helping businesses. Okay, the idea is to try to change the supply side, right? To try and move the supply side, to try and get incentives to producers to start producing more products. Now, there's a very important reason why you would do this. Okay, I'm going to delete these. So, if you look and see, let's say that you do something to get more businesses supplying products, agreeing to produce more things. When that happens, supply shifts to the right, okay? And when supply shifts to the right, it causes your GDP to go up and your prices to go down, right? As there's more things getting made, that means more workers get hired, meaning more people have jobs, the economy will be expanding. But the economy will be expanding while also driving prices down. This becomes the big theory of the way to beat the stagflation. Okay? Now, how do you actually do this? Number one, government involvement in the economy needs to start backing away. Okay? The government needs to start going more hands-off, but not in a hands-off way, like totally hands-off, but hands-off a lot of things like regulations, rules, environmental regulations, anything that would slow a company down, get rid of it, okay? They would cut taxes, all right, on everybody. So the idea was very low taxes, very low government spending. Now, I will say this with the supply-side economics. Usually the tax cuts are for the highest tax brackets, meaning the richest people, or they're tax cuts for businesses. The reason why is that under this theory, we are not trying to move the demand curve. This curve right here, the average American citizen, we are not trying to move. We're trying to move the businesses. So we need to give tax cuts to the businesses or to the people who have enough money to start a business. And that's one of the big kind of negative sides of supply-side economics is it's a lot of handouts to companies and corporations and low taxes because those are the job creators is the idea. In order to pay for the tax cuts, the government has to try to get rid of some of its spending. So oftentimes very much like welfare programs, things like that, are often cut in supply-side economics. And like I said, government regulations out the door usually to try and get production going as easy as possible for businesses. Now, an analysis of supply-side economics, it was unintentionally applied in the 1920s. They didn't call it supply-side economics back then, but they were basically doing it, and it led to huge economic growth throughout the 1920s, although we know eventually that led to the Great Depression. Most famously, this was used in the 1980s with Reaganomics, right? Ronald Reagan implemented these as part of the way to fight the stagflation. They cut taxes, especially on the wealthy, and it worked. Unemployment fell, the inflation rate fell, GDP had a very high growth. However, it probably did not work as well as Ronald Reagan had wanted. In fact, we actually had a recession towards the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency that maybe illustrated some of the weaknesses of the supply side policies. But in terms of solving the stagflation, it worked. The problem, though, is if you had to look at what year, like when did America start running so much debt, it was during Ronald Reagan's presidency. And really ever since then, our government has really taken a pro-supply side policy. And as a result, our government has a lot of deficit. Just the reality is with how much taxes were cut under Reagan and the presidents that followed them, there was just so much money that was not being brought in taxes. And with that, the government ran a much higher debt. Although, like I said, today most economists aren't very worried about government debt because they're the government, they're not an individual household consumer. But that is one of the criticisms of the supply side policies. So with that, supply side, right, the idea is getting tax cuts, okay, and for the businesses, for the people who are going to make stuff. The idea is to try to get them to make more, which would then hire more people, meaning you'd have a higher GDP and you'd have prices that would eventually fall. And that's kind of the idea. This has been used many times since, especially Trump's policies have been very much so supply side, but even President Obama during the 2008 recession provided trillions of dollars in bailout money for corporations, especially corporations in the financial world and stuff like that. So it's not just the Republican thing, although supply side policies are probably more identified as a Republican idea. It's been used by both parties in the past, okay? So either demand side or supply side both have their problems. There's no perfect solution, but that's the general two different ways that the government manages the economy. Alrighty, guys, thanks. I'll see y'all.